Hi, everybody. I'm here with Master Astrologer Chris Turner. In this session, we're going to take a look at a chart that she's chosen. So, Chris, guide us through where you'd start and what you'd prioritize and how you might articulate some of the placements of your chosen chart.
Okay, well, for those that do not recognise the picture on your screen, this is Lindy Chamberlain, who was world famous because way back in 1980, a dingo took her baby out of a tent at Uluru, where they were camping. Now, if it's okay with you, I'd like to give a little bit of background as to why I'm doing this chart, Frank, because I think it's important. Um, when this happened back in, did I say 1970, 1980, in August 1980, when it first happened, it certainly captured the attention of every Australian, and I think in the end, a lot of people around the world. But I was particularly fascinated, and we immediately wrote off to her and asked her for her birth data. She gave us an approximate birth data, and the chart that I will be using is a rectified chart by me, but it's generally accepted when anybody does a chart of Lindy, they use that chart. But I want to make it very clear that that's what it was. Now, I found her natal chart extremely interesting, and I'm hoping you all will too. I should bring that up, I suppose. This is the picture that captured everybody's imagination. That's with the baby that was taken way back in 1980. And this is a timeline. I'll come back to that if we need to. Here is her natal chart. And what I found really fascinating about it was that the whole story is in there. I used to give this chart to my students, particularly the more advanced ones who'd been doing delineation in combination with dynamic charts. And I'd give this to them as a mystery chart. They had no idea who she was. Sorry, not they knew who they were. And I just tell them that this was a lady who was coming to them heavily pregnant in June of 1980, and go ahead. And I was constantly amazed at how close they came to actually not quite working out exactly what happened, because of course there is no way you can predict that anybody's going to have your baby stolen by a dingo. But they did manage to work out the main, not the main events, but the main trends, what was likely to happen. And I also wanted to use it as a means of demonstrating how you have to be very careful about predicting specifics. But we're not going to do that today. We're only looking at the natal chart, right? I have got the other charts here if you want to have a look at them. And the other thing that I think is very important to mention is that when this was done, there was no computers. I did all these charts by hand. And of course, because we did them by hand, you can see it's very simple. There are no asteroids in it, anything like that. We kept it always as simple as we possibly could. Now, if somebody wanted to add the asteroids toward the end of my consulting era, I'd started to use the big 4 asteroids, but I'm a great believer in keep it simple, stupid. The more simple, it's cleaner, much cleaner, and you don't get distracted. So that's why it looks almost empty. Okay, so here I have my chart. I have Lindy sitting opposite me. We have no idea what's going to happen to the poor woman. So the first thing I would look at when I looked at it, obviously when calculating it, I had sort of registered that she is a sun sign Pisces and a Scorpio ascendant with the moon in Capricorn, the 3 basics. And somewhere in my subconscious, if you like, because I never made notes, but I would register that, okay, she is going to be a fairly withdrawn person. She's going to be fairly difficult to get information out of with that combination of Pisces, Capricorn and Scorpio. Then I tended to sit and look at the chart, sort of sit right back look at the chart, what stands out. And of course, in this chart, the most obvious thing that stands out is that Mars, Saturn, Pluto right at the top there. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? It's just dawned on me, you know. And of course, as you know, and I also should add here that when you, Frank, asked me to do this chart, I said to you, oh, I'd rather like to do Lindy Chamberlain. And this was before, I think it was about 4 days later, it all came out in the news that she's just published a new book and all this kind of thing, which was, and now I can see why, of course. So yeah, that came out quite independently. But that was, I admit that back then, that was the first time I'd seen that little combination. Well, not the first time I'd seen it, but it was the first time because these were 1948 people, and here in 1980, you know, we're only in our 30s, so we've not lived through it before. And the fact that it's right at the top of the chart there stood out for me, whereas the personal planets are all under the line, you know. One of the other things, I'll just bring up another one here. I'm just using this beginner's page from Solar Fire because it's just got the little information. I do like to look to see if there is a predominance of elements and modes. I think that also gives me something to begin with. And again here, of course, she is predominantly water with a healthy dose of fire. And, you know, I quite like that combination, but I'm noticing more that she's got a lack of earth. She hasn't got a great deal of earth in her chart, which says to me far more than the fact that she's got the big fire-water combination. Also that she's lacking in mutable. So, you know, she's lacking in that earth mutable, lacking in the Virgo side to her, if you like, so that she's probably not always as discerning as she should be. She's not as discriminating as she should be. So that immediately told me, as the astrologer, okay, you have to choose your words fairly carefully with this lady, because that the highly intuitive side of her could very easily, oh, this is another very important thing, she is likely to pick up on the negatives rather than the positives with that kind of combination. So with that, I have a sort of a beginning point, okay? If I can talk about that Mars, Saturn, Pluto a bit more, at that time, that was in 1980, we were coming to the end of the Vietnamese War, or we'd just finished it. And there was a big thing about how that Mars, Saturn, Pluto was appearing in the charts of reincarnated people who had been killed in the Second World, not the Vietnamese War, but the Second World War, that these were the reincarnations. Now, for what that's worth, I didn't use that. I just sort of, okay, interesting, and put it aside. But it certainly does indicate that whatever this woman is, and at that time she was just a simple pastor's wife, nothing more, with 2 kids. But to me, straight away, I thought, right, this person is going to have a major part in public to play, something she's reluctant to do. And again, I would take that and put it aside. It's there. I did afterwards come to call that particular combination, and it's interesting looking at it from today's perspective, I came to call that the scapegoat combination. And again, I think we're seeing that today in the black guys who have been killed in America. We see that quite a lot, the scapegoats. But yeah, and then after that, I would just say to, you know, I'd give a quick rundown to Lindy and say, well, look, this is what I'm seeing, that you are a fairly withdrawn person. You perhaps don't trust all that easily. You're guarded. I would say nothing about the public thing, that something was not right there. But, you know, and then I'd probably say, okay, is there anything in particular that you want to know about? You know, is there something that you're particularly interested in? And I would say if she was a heavily pregnant lady, that she would probably say to me, well, yeah, I'd like to know, when I'm going to have a child, what it's going to be, how's the child going to be. Probably I would start just to have a look at the major things and do a fairly generalized reading just to basically get her relaxed, get her talking. So I would talk about the sun in Pisces, that she was a fairly emotional, a fairly private person, which is emphasized by the Scorpio ascendant. And the other thing that would come to mind immediately there is that, oh my goodness, you're going to have a Gemini child, and there could be a bit of a clash there. So I might bring that in there, that, your child is going to be a Gemini, so you're going to have to realize that this child is probably nothing like you and will probably be far more chatty, if you like, not as private as you are, and that could cause a bit of a clash. And I haven't seen her husband's chart. I think, if I remember rightly, he was a Libran, but something there. I'd just say, well, she may take after the child, may take after the father a little bit more than you, but be prepared that you could clash a little bit with this child. And then again, also the moon in Capricorn, the Scorpio with the Pisces, how private she was. The moon conjunct Jupiter is telling me straight away, and I know this. She's already told me she's a Seventh-day Adventist and she's a pastor's wife. So I could point out to her, look, there you have that moon conjunct Jupiter that is showing that religious side to you. And sort of hopefully by now that would open up. Now, I think that my general approach, if I haven't, by now, hopefully they're talking to you. They're a chart in a consultation, I call them consultations. It's a conversation, not a monologue. So that each little thing you bring up, you ask them about them. You might say, let's see, do you like to write, with the Mercury in the 5th house? Are you creative? And ask for that question. She would actually answer yes to that. So I could just lead on and say, what sort of things do you do? How do you like to be creative? And you look for a thread in that conversation, which can lead you then on to something else. So she might say something and you can say, oh, well, look at that. You've got that Mars opposition Mercury. Can be a bit sharp-tongued if somebody rubs you up the wrong way. And again, we know very well that, yes, she can be. Now, the interesting thing is with this particular chart is that it is every chart. Let me go back a bit. Every chart has a conflict in it. Your chart does, my chart does, every chart has something that says one thing and then something else that says the complete opposite. And this is often, see, I'm skipping ahead now. This is why I said that cold reading is a curse, because my mind is going like this. I think that if you find that conflict in the chart, that really is a very, very good way to really get into the chart. So one of the things, we've got all sorts of little conflicts here. We've got all the oppositions. I also believe if you use a wider orb, which I did not have time to do, she actually has a kite between that Mars, and I call that Mars, Saturn, Pluto. I put them basically together because this is where I get a bit blasphemous. To me, if you've got Mars conjunct Saturn conjunct Pluto, then you've got Mars conjunct Pluto with Saturn as the conduit. And I think in any aspects like this, it might be very wide. You see this a lot in stelliums. The two end planets may not necessarily, I have that in my own chart, they're not necessarily in conjunction, but by the time you travel through all the planets in between, they are having an influence on each other. So here you do have this, there is a kite to me between those top 3 planets, the Venus and the vertex, which I don't use very often, but I put it in because it was fashionable to do so at the time. The vertex had just been discovered, or just come into fashion, so it got in. So there is that kite between that moon Jupiter, the Venus vertex, and the Mars, Saturn, Pluto. I'm pointing to the chart here, I'm sorry. And that is a very, very positive combination. The grand trine you can already see here, even with the narrower orbs. So there's that really beautiful, positive, you know, the Mars to the Venus to the Jupiter moon. This is a clever woman. This is a woman who is able to speak her mind. She's able to be creative with it. And it all comes out through that Mercury. So there is no doubt that communication is something that is going to be very important to her and extremely positive. But against that, you've got that awful Uranus opposition to the Jupiter moon. And you have all that opposition from Mercury up to those other three. And you've got the Neptune Venus vertex opposition. So she actually has, if you do it with wider orbs, comes the closest to a grand sextile that I've ever seen in a chart. You know, the one where it's a hexagon. Is it a hexagon? The six-sided thing. Star of David. Ah. And it's not quite. I think there's one leg missing. But it's very, very close. But those oppositions, and an opposition to me says that whatever this is going to be triggered from outside. So with all those oppositions, I'm thinking this is, and I mightn't say this out loud, but in my head, I'm thinking this is a woman who is going to rub a lot of people up the wrong way. And to look at subsequent happenings. Now, I swear to you, you know, this is all coming from the chart, not from what I know of her. But what is interesting from what we know of her is that she was a hated woman. The entire country hated this woman for years. But everyone who spoke to her used to say, she's so sweet. She's a delightful person. She is so easy to talk to and so easy to get along with. And that, to me, because of that Mars, Saturn, Pluto, which is such a public thing, is her big conflict, that there is this public persona. And if you go back, I think, no, I think we can go forward. I mean, people used to look at her face. This was just after Azaria was taken, and sure, she's got sunglasses on, but everybody ignored that. Instead, they looked at this face and said, this is a very cold woman. She obviously must have murdered her child because, you know, there's no sign of grief whatsoever. When, of course, if we as astrologers, and this is what I was talking about before, about being a real guide to you know, how to approach someone, how to understand that they don't think necessarily like you do. And I mean, any astrologer, I would think, would just look at that Scorpio rising, that Capricorn moon, and that sun in Pisces, and know that she's grieving like hell, but there's no way she's going to show it in public. And then there is the practical side as against the emotional side, which had her actually only a few weeks after it happened, of bringing out a whole thing about a dingo and showing in how she'd researched it and how the dingo really could have done this and so on. And she incensed every Australian with that. And I think that is something that is clearly shown in that chart with that conflict. Have you got anything to add? I need to take a break, to take a breath.
I'm fascinated with it. I've not seen the rectified chart before, so I'm looking at it with completely fresh eyes, and I think it's fascinating. The Mars, Saturn, Pluto, which we're having at the moment as we're speaking by square, Mars, Saturn, Mars square Saturn, Pluto, of course. Yes, interesting to see it as the scapegoat, because you often think of the creative power of Leo, and then you forget the other side is either being bullied or being dominated or having to fight something greater than who you are. It's a sort of
Exactly.
big battle, isn't it?
Yeah. That you put it beautifully. I mean, and this is what happened to Lindy, is that she had to fight, and she was only exonerated in 2012. So that's 32 years it took her. And I mean, I did show you that timeline um, earlier, and that was just the trials and the inquests. I didn't put in there all the books and the movies and the threats and the, all the little bits that follow. And of course, she was sentenced to life imprisonment and then released on license after 3 years. But then it took her another 25 years to actually be exonerated. And there's still a lot of people, to this day, there are a lot of people who will not accept that a dingo did take that baby. I must admit, I don't like to think that. I'd like to excuse the dingo as well. But then I have my own theories on that. The Uranus, that's right, the Uranus Mercury in that mutual reception, and of course the Uranus ruling the 5th, the Mercury ruling the 8th. And I know it is in a trine, but I was immediately not comfortable with that Venus opposition Neptune, or the vertex opposition, if you like. It is too wide. The Venus-Neptune is too wide to be an actual opposition. But it, nevertheless, there was that very, the thought was that she could very easily lose this baby somehow. And a lot of this is intuition too. When you do these things, and of course it's very easy for me here in retrospect to see it all, but I swear blind to anyone who will listen that I'm not the least bit psychic. But I will say I've got a strong intuition. But I learned over the years if I got a strong feeling about something, I would say to the client, look, this isn't in the chart, but I have a really strong feeling, blah, 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 blah. And I'd say to them, that's not coming from anywhere, just, in my own head, I'm just giving it to you for what it's worth. Never allowing them to think that that might be something I'm gleaning from the chart. I want them to know that it's not astrology. It's fortune telling, if you like. And I found over the years that the more I did, and I don't know how many thousands of charts I did over the years, you stop counting after a while. But the more I did them, the more I found that intuitiveness was quite often, more often than not, right. And my intuition with this would straight away, and I found with the students, they would come up with the same thing. Something is going to happen to this baby. Her history is such that she'd not lost a baby, her pregnancies had been healthy, everything had been fine, but it's showing in her chart that there is a problem with a child. So that increases the odds that it could be this one. And especially, I don't want to do that now, but especially when you looked at the transits of what was there, I think that whole area, I have done them, but that whole area was triggered quite strongly. We might have a look at them briefly if we have time a bit later on. And really, that's, it sounds deceptively simple. I mean, if we got stuck and the conversation lapsed, always I could go back to the individual aspects there and talk about, a bit more about the Mercury opposition Saturn, or whichever one there is. There's the Sun, sextiling there's lots of things there. The Moon conjunct Jupiter, and you can go into more detail about individual things like this if I got stuck. But half the time, I used to find, as I said, I'd do a 90-minute consultation, an hour of which would be on the natal chart and half an hour would be on I never liked doing predictive work. I've never been comfortable doing predictive work, but you have to do it. I mean, that's part of being a professional astrologer. And so I'd do an hour on the natal chart and we'd talk about, she'd ask for suggestions on, well, how do I handle this? What do you suggest that I do? I would say with that, look, make sure you're checked out by a gynecologist or something, or somebody has any health problems, and I see any health problems there. Always never try to specify them. but advise it's not a bad idea to go and have a checkup. And you can ask, say, ask him just to have a good look at your kidneys. You can do things like that, but never, ever tell anybody that this is what is wrong with you or this is what is going to happen. And let me say, as a warning, that I think nearly every astrologer, and I'd like to get your opinion on this, we have all said things in all innocence, which has come back to bite us. And I have two particular instances in mind, which is not with this chart, but a woman I knew had the moon in the 12th, and it was going to be, had a nasty aspect to Mars, and I can't even remember anymore what was there. But I said to her, look, just be careful of hospitals. There's something not quite right about hospitals here. Be careful. And 6 months, 8 months later, her friend rang me and said, why did you tell her not to go to hospital? I said, I didn't tell her that. And she said, yeah, well, she's been diagnosed with a lump in her breast and she's refusing to go to hospital because you told her she shouldn't go to hospital because it's dangerous. And another instance where I did a chart blind, which I very rarely do, where very clearly in the chart it showed, I think again it was a Mars moon, something like that in the 5th house, which fairly clearly indicates a miscarriage or the loss of a child or something like that. And I gave this person I did it for an aunt of mine. It was the only reason I did it. She wanted it done for a friend of hers. And I said something about, look, somewhere along the line, you may have miscarried, or there's been a loss of a child. We're focusing on that tonight. Sorry about that. And then I gave her 25 positive things about how all this stuff was working. The only feedback I got was, how dare you tell them that they're going to lose their child? And again, I said, no, I didn't tell them that. And on closer questioning, it turned out that she'd already miscarried twice. So what I said had really panicked her. They didn't hear any of the positive stuff I said, only that negative. So again, this is part of my advice on how to do this stuff. Watch what you say, particularly if you've got a ruling Jupiter or a ruling Mercury and a lot of Gemini. Watch that very carefully, because it gets you into trouble. And I've no doubt you've experienced much the same.
Yes. And I think learning to, I think when you record a session, you immediately watch your words more carefully and closely. And I always recommend that people record sessions from day one, because you just learn to phrase things in a way that if they're heard again, they're heard clearly, because people will go away, and either it's what you've said or what you haven't said that's upset them. Often it's you haven't told
what they want to hear. They don't necessarily hear what you're telling them.
Yeah. And sometimes it's literally a case of you telling them or not telling them what they really wanted to hear in the first place.
Right. That's right.
And feeling like because you haven't mentioned it, it's not going to happen. So there can be all sorts of ways of doing it. And as you said with Lindy's chart, with the Scorpio, the moon in Capricorn, the sun in Pisces, it's going to pick up on it's that watery feeling, isn't it? That always sinks and goes to the bottom level. And sometimes that can be with negativity, and you tell them 10 good things and one caution, and it's a caution they'll hold on to.
All they'll hear. Yeah, that's the only thing they will hear. And it's and I think also with recording, well, because it's different now. I mean, in those days, I used to use a tape deck, which you don't use anymore. But I found it a very useful tool too, because I very quickly learned intuitively that, okay, I should be at this point in the chart by now. I should be at that point. It's like doing a lecture, as we know, we feel it in here when you've gotten so far, and okay, that means I've only got so long left, and it helps with that as well. So is there anything else you'd like me to look at here? Because I'll go on a little bit further to say what I do after this.
Well, if you're happy, if you've prepared something with the transits. If you want to show something, add whatever you feel
Oh,
ready to,
I
welcome
can
to.
certainly show you those. I mean, I didn't come with the idea of, trying to interpret them, but
No.
people might be interested in having a look at them, and I'm quite happy for them to do so. But let me just finish by saying that once we've gone through that, also, as I think I said before, if you look at what's going on dynamically, that will give you a huge clue as to why they're coming to see you. And that also gives you that bit of focus, because very few people, especially lay people, they don't go to an astrologer just for fun. They'll go to a fortune teller or a tarot reader, or but they don't go to an astrologer because we're usually a lot more expensive than tarot readers and so on. And they're usually, the astrologer is the last resort for a problem they may have had. I remember one client saying to me once, after I'd looked at their chart, she said, "You know what?" She said, "You have just told me what's taken my psychiatrist 2 years to get to." And she said, "You did it in 10 minutes." So, people are coming for answers. That you said something just a moment ago. You can't give them the answers, and especially not necessarily the ones they're coming to you for, because I find a lot of people come to you for permission to be a certain way. They don't come to be, to be told, "Look, an aggressive, an aggressive person with criminal tendencies." They want to be told that it's okay to be an aggressive person with criminal tendencies. Or if they've got a major, suffer from migraines, they want you to tell them that they've got a brain tumor. And of course, you can't tell them these things. And there's another little word of advice: have a list of professionals, doctors, therapists, chiropractors, psychologists. Have that list there. Do not try to be something you are not. And don't ever be afraid of saying, "I don't know," or "I can't tell you that." You'd be amazed how many people come and ask when they're going to die. And you have to remember, you might have a damn good idea. But in my experience, there are many times in life when you can choose to die or not. It comes up a lot. And it's not up to you. You're not God. You are there as a guide only. Okay, you're going to have to stop me, Frank. Once I get on once I get on my soapbox, I don't stop easily. So having done with the natal chart, yes, then I would usually move on to the dynamic chart. And I'll just show you what I've got here, and you can have a look for yourself. But what I wanted to say is too, before we run out of time, I think one of the critical things is too that when you finish a session, don't just abandon the poor client. Don't just say, "Okay, time's up. Nice to see you. Goodbye," and shush them out the door. You've created something where the adrenaline is actually going for both of you, and any actor will tell you this. Anybody who's done any acting, anyone who does lecturing like you and I do, we know that once you're done, you have to go and have a drink or do something to come down. That is a normal way of being. And it's the same with a client after an astrology session. You've heightened so many things in them that you need something, whether it be a cup of tea before they go. I used to do a simple rune reading, which was amazing because it always said in a couple of lines what I just spent 90 minutes telling them. But just a simple 3 rune reading, and we'd just do that, and that would bring them down so that they didn't walk out the door with their mind reeling and going over and over, all these terrible things that I just told them. Do you know what I mean?
So what would that look like?
The rune reading,
Mm.
I just do a simple 3 rune ones, you know, past, present, future. Past, this is where you're coming from, this is where you're going, and this is what you need to do to get there. Just a simple thing like that. And I had, what's his name, the fellow who wrote the book, you'd know better than I do, the little brown book. I've got it here somewhere. I mean, if you like, astro dice are another good one to use for this kind of thing. But I'd let them read it. I wouldn't try to, you know, I'd open the page for them and say, here you are, this is where you're coming from, read it. And I'd get them to read it out loud. And I'd sit there and go, interesting. You know, do the appropriate noises and sounds, because it consolidated. I found that kind of thing, you might like to do, if you do tarot, which I don't do, you might like to do a simple tarot reading. You know, just a very, very simple one, just to consolidate all the information that you've given them, because in my experience, I found, as I said, the runes were uncanny in the way they used to just say what I just said. The tarot cards, I've seen them do the same thing. The only time I saw that not work, and they seemed to be talking about something quite different, until we suddenly realized that we'd spent most of our session talking about this guy's fiance, and they were actually talking about her, not him. That's the only time I saw that happen. It doesn't matter what you do, just don't bring them down gently. You know, that's the main thing. So, okay, would you like me to show you the other stuff now? Do you have any questions? Is there anything more you would like to know, Mr. Clifford?
Again, thank you very much for sharing that. That was very interesting. It's yes, I think what you're saying about doing a rune reading in a bag of runes and get them to pick out something, it's what's covered in 90 minutes or in 2 hours, however long the session is. It can be very overwhelming, and people go away feeling there's so much that's been discussed, so many different parts of who they are, what they are, that doing a summary at the end or getting them to refocus on something that's in spite of the traumas they may have discussed or anything else, focus on maybe the creative path that they're doing next, and just sum up something that's positive is extremely helpful when they walk out the door, to focus on that. And I think you're talking about reading the person, there's a huge amount of to be had from somebody who focuses on a positive aspect of who they are and what they need. Just the engagement in that changes the dynamic of their life, and they walk away from a session often always knowing what you're talking about. I think whatever we discuss in the chart is already known to the client on some level. It's either been buried.
100%.
Yeah, it's either been buried, it's been put aside, it's been put on hold for the children or whoever.
In fact, I used to open with that. I used to say to them, look, I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know. I'm just going to tell you maybe from a slightly different perspective, or maybe highlight it in a different way. But absolutely, I think that's important. They know that this is not something you're coming up with, but it's there in them. But also, I think with what you just said about the positive highlights, I do agree with that. But I also think we are under, and this comes back to language, we're under an obligation that if there is difficult stuff there, we are under an obligation to impart that. It's not the imparting of it that is the problem, it's how you impart it that is the problem. But you can't, you know, I mean, this is something that I've always had a bit of a problem with in the whole, well, what we call the New Age movement. Of course, that's passé now. But all the love and light, and I used to get very, you know, tear my hair out, that life is not love and light. There is love and light, but there's also darkness and aggression and violence, and we are not doing ourselves or our clients a favor by avoiding that or by denying that. But what we have to do is try and give them a channel out of that violence. I would have told Lindy here that that there was a book in her. And that, I mean, look at that Jupiter in the second house. She's going to make a lot of money out of some sort of publishing or writing. With the Mercury the way it is the focal point of that kite. You know, so that's what I would have actually tried to focus her into. You should write down, do you keep a journal? God, that was a common question for me. Do you keep a journal? Do you keep a diary? I would if I were you. You'd find it very handy. And in her chart, I think that is something I would avoid, I must admit, that Mars, Saturn, Pluto. I would not bring that up very much at all. Maybe just to say, it looks like it could be perhaps in the public eye somewhere, or the Pluto Saturn in that 10th house. Yeah, maybe you're going to be, you know, maybe there's a bit of control freakishness in there. Maybe you are going to run your own business at some point. And she is a bit of a control freak. You know, she's shown that. She does it in a very nice way, but she has shown that. She was very, very frustrated in not being able to help more with the whole investigation and the fact that people didn't believe her. But I certainly would not bring up the scapegoat bit. And as I said, with the whole issue around the baby, I would just advise that, look, you know, make sure you go and have a good thorough checkout. You know, it's not going to do you any harm to go and visit a gynecologist or something like that. But certainly no mention of, you know, look, I very much fear for this baby's life. I certainly would not say anything like that. So, okay, I put a few pictures in because I just thought, you know, that might be those of you that have not seen her before. This is with her two sons. And this is when she was turning up for her first trial in Darwin. And this is, as you can see here, this is what they did when the first inquest that they held did show that they did come out with the conclusion that the dingo had taken the baby. And she came outside the court and she and Michael held this particular poster up. And again, everybody criticised her for it. But, you know, how could she do that? It didn't matter what she did. She was criticised. She could not win. It's as simple as that. Here I personally like to use a graphic ephemeris for transits. And here I've just been very brief. I've only done the 30-degree ones. I would normally also have the 45-degree ones in there because they, to me, are the triggering aspects. But I thought for the sake of brevity, I'd just put the 30-degree ones in. And it is interesting because, and remember when I did this, I didn't have this advantage. I didn't have a graphic ephemeris. I'd done them all painstakingly by hand. So when we go down to August, if you bring, I hope you can see my cursor there, yeah. What you're doing is getting a really big sort of gathering here that, whoops, come back. No, I've gone too far. So you are starting to get something here in August, and then it comes back again later on in 1981, which of course is when she was starting all, you know, all the trials and the criticisms and so on and so forth. I must admit I did not look this afternoon at this as much as I should, but here we do have, just so you can see it, because I know that Uranus, I remember still that Uranus was very involved, and that line is what? I'm sorry if I'm too close to the computer and warping the sound. She was having, that looks to me like a conjunction, but I can't see. I can't see without my glasses, but I can't see with them. You've got the two squares from Uranus here. That's right. So that they're obviously going to be important too. Because I also, here we go. The Uranus two squares. I knew it was in there somewhere. You've got here's the Uranus line for those that don't know how to use these things. And you can see here, square, square. And in fact, it was stationary during July. Oh, for God's sake, Chris. During July and August. And if this is your natal planet, this line that goes along. Oh, God. Sorry, Frank.
Right.
This is your natal planet, this line here, which you take along, and there it is to Mercury. I keep doing that. Well, I'll keep it on there now. That's the progressions. They're the actual progressions. And I loathe multiple wheels. I find them so hard to read. And an interesting little thing, other things that I like to do, to give me a general idea of what's going on. I like to do the progressed moon declination, to give me an idea of where cyclically this person may be. In my mind, and this is again just how I work, others might have a different interpretation, but to me, the secondary progressions tell me what's going on that internal level, whereas the directions, the solar arc directions, tell me how they are likely to manifest, and the transits tell me how they probably will manifest. So, I mean, you're going to have to do this for me because I can't see, but looking at the personal things here, we've certainly got the Jupiter. Well, she's just had a Jupiter return. What else have we got here that you can see?
I think they're the progression. So.
The outer wheel, the progressions, the inner wheel is the natal chart.
Yeah.
Yep. So, the midheaven is just past. That's right. That's what I remember now. The midheaven is just past that conjunction to Mars, and that would have happened just a few days before. This is set for the 17th of August, 1980, as you can see, the day that it happened. So just before that, the midheaven. Now, as I said, this is a rectified chart. So the midheaven and ascendant could be out slightly. I don't think that they are, but I don't think they're out by much. And the ascendant, now what did I notice with that before? Progressed ascendant here is coming up to the opposition with that Uranus, which of course again rules that 5th house and the 8th house. And I remember that, they stood out quite strongly. What that means internally, I'm not an esoteric astrologer. I think you would have far more success interpreting that from an inner or an esoteric level than I would. To me, that is just plain violence, and when I say violence, I don't necessarily mean someone coming along with a knife, but I mean events as such that they shake you up. They're traumatic as against passive, or dynamic as against passive. And that's what I mean, if you like, about violence. That, as we all know, those kinds of dynamic events, unless controlled, can very quickly become psychologically or emotionally or even physically violent. So what else did I notice in there? Can you see anything offhand? The progress moon is coming up to a new lunation with the sun. You can see down here.
Yeah.
So that would happen in a couple of days after this. So
probably about 9 months after that. If it's
yeah. And of course that's when all hell broke loose. Actually, I'll show you the timeline in a minute. Okay, so here we have the directions, the solar arc directions, which I like. I like solar arc directions. I think they're very, first of all, they're a great party trick because there's something you can do very quickly, even just with an ephemeris. You can work things out and a very quick way of rectifying a chart as well. Not totally accurate, but these are shortcuts, if you like, and that you can do sometimes. And I think they're very, very simple. They're very simple, and anything that's simple, I like. So what did we have there? Now there was something I noticed there. So we've got here we've got the Virgo. These three have just passed a year, 2 years before, but she's just finished a cycle of these planets all opposing that sun. So this is a build-up. This certainly was a build-up, and probably were right on top. Again, I should emphasize here, I'm not, and I'm being blasphemous again. I do a lot of blasphemous things with astrology. I don't necessarily stick strictly to orbs that, it's not exact, so therefore it's not going to happen. Sorry, but it could, because you could be very good at delaying it. there's things like that. I tend to be quite flexible, and I've found in my own life that, sometimes with a Pluto or a Saturn aspect, I've waited for years for this to happen. It doesn't happen. I sit back and think, oh, thank God that's over. I got away with it, and bang, it hits. There can often be little delays and things with other transits pointing that out, or other aspects pointing that out. But whenever I say that, oh look, that's close enough in orb for me, and everybody goes, ugh. But yeah, I mean that to me is being intuitive and creative, maybe too creative. What else have we got there? We've got here too that the sun is just approaching, and I don't know, if you use the vertex or not. If you think of the vertex as being a fated point, you've got the sun very rapidly approaching the conjunction to that vertex. So it's almost, you could almost say that destiny is about to play a very big part in her life, perhaps. That's how all that stuff from the progressions might play out. And I do tend with these sorts of things to look mainly for the conjunctions and the oppositions, and then the squares as sort of a backup. The important thing to me, though, is that all these dynamic charts have to repeat. They have to, I'm looking for a word now, they have to validate what is in the other charts. There's that old saying that if you see something in a chart once, it's a possibility. If you see it in a chart twice, it's a probability. If it's there 3 times, you can be damn sure it's probably going to happen. And I think, the more you can validate something, the better. But I caution you, and I've seen this too often too, people do chart after chart after chart to get that validation. And that's the danger. That we couldn't do that back in my day because you didn't have a computer. But these days, of course, it's not there. And you see, the 7th harmonic Mars is opposite the progressed sun. That's the validation. No, it's not. Sorry. You will always find a validation if you do enough charts. Always. And I think I've just about run out. Is there anything more you'd like me to say, Frank? I'll just go back and bring up that timeline. So for those that don't know, just how that, where are we? Now this timeline, I actually checked this out today. I thought, make sure you get your dates right. And there are 4 pages of events. And I just cut it down to the main things about the actual kidnapping, if I can put it that way. And you can see just from this, I mean, there's all sorts of things in there. As I say, she was married, she divorced, she got married, she had, for those that don't know, she had a baby in jail. Kalia, who has also a very interesting chart. Movies made, books written, she's been constantly in the news for 40 years. But she's over in America now, so, although I think she might have come back home to live, actually. So you can see there she went through 4 inquests about it, sentenced to life imprisonment. Now, that must have been horrible when she knew she didn't do it. So this is just to give you a rough outline of you can see it started in 1980 and did not finish till 2012, and that's a long time. And of course, this year, 17th of August, marked the first 40th. Azaria would have been 40 years old this year, which is very hard to. But what she endured, and you can see that in the chart, actually. She was accused of Azaria meaning gift of the devil or something, Satan's gift, something like that, because she chose such an unusual name. She was a Seventh-day Adventist, so she was really persecuted for having a different religion, which you can see here with this quincunx, not to mention these squares. This is where this comes in. This is where this big aspect comes in as well. The persecution they suffered because of their religion.
Yeah.
And you better shut me up because we'll still be going here, in another 2 or 3 hours. So is there anything else you'd like me to say? What have I left out?
No, you've done a great job. You've done a great job. Thank you. No, I just want to thank you for your time, Chris, and for giving us an insight into what you do and how you approach it, and appreciate the time and energy you've put into looking at this chart. And thank you again for giving your time and for the donation to Deadly Science as well. So that's a great, worthwhile cause.
Well, they have no idea it's coming, so it'll be a nice surprise for them. I haven't said anything to them, of course.
Good. Wonderful. Well, once again, thank you for your time, and yes, good luck with the upcoming conference as well. I'm sure it'll be another great success.
Well, yours is before mine, so good luck with yours. And thank you, Frank. This has actually been fun. Maybe I won't retire after all. And on that note,
Thanks, Chris. Take care of yourself. Thank you.
thanks, Frank.